Thanks everyone for listening in. Next panel is going to be privacy as an enabler for enterprise digital asset adoption. Moderating the discussion will be Jacqueline Kwok, who's head of platform at DCG. I'll let her introduce the panelists and lead the discussion.
Thank you. I'll have the panelists introduce themselves. In one line, what do you do?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Eran Barak. I lead Shielded Technologies, which is the engineering powerhouse behind the Midnight Network that focuses on delivering privacy blockchain for the enterprise.
Hi, my name is Howard. I'm a founder of an L1 called Alio. Alio itself is a new L1 that supports private smart contracts. Use cases for it include private payments, private swaps, private bridging, private everything.
Hi, my name is Patrick Chang. I run a fund called Dispersion Capital. So we're a pre-seed seed fund focused exclusively on innovative infrastructure that leads to mass adoption.
Omar Azhar, head of business development at zk-SNARKs. I mostly spend my time talking to banks, central banks, nation states on essentially how we can help them rebuild Swift and interbanking networks.
Thank you, everybody. So the first question is, you see privacy, ZKP, anonymity often get mixed into the same sentence. In your words, could you guys help us clarify what any of those mean and why it matters? We'll start with Howard.
Sure. Well, I'll say that they're definitely not interchangeable. I wish they were, but they're not. I think the space has been pretty confusing, especially with these technical terms. I mean, ZK right now has been used in different contexts. So ZK really represents three different things in crypto. There's the kind of scalability narrative around ZK. There's the computational integrity narrative around ZK. And then there's the privacy narrative around ZK. And I think right now you're seeing the first two that I mentioned are really taking shape. You've seen it with ZK rollups. You've seen it with ZK EVMs. But now you're also starting to see the privacy narrative really start to pick up. And I think a big part of that is because people have historically been looking at the scaling problem and the throughput problem. There's been a lot of comparisons about TPS, but now I think people are realizing that this issue is for the most part, I think, addressed. And so now people are realizing, well, when I go to tap to pay and I want to buy a cup of coffee, I'm actually revealing my entire account history, and that doesn't work well. You don't want the merchant and the barista to learn your financial history, past, present, and future, or allow it for data scientists to just opt in and track you alongside your own history. And so I think that's where ZK is now being used from a privacy context, and I think that is probably kind of the more relevant part of the technology that ZK brings to the table in crypto.
Yeah, I would agree. We started looking at this back in 2018 with the question, can a blockchain keep a secret? And to Howard's point, we realized we needed to really face three separate challenges. One is, how do we protect data? Because let's face it, businesses are not going to put all their information out on the blockchain for everybody to see. Maybe you guys do, but I'd like to have it different. How do we think about computational privacy, or how we kind of process the data, and how do we protect the metadata? And zero knowledge and some of the technologies that we're going to talk about today help us achieve those.
Yeah, and I think, both of you guys raised a really good point, too, because, ZK has always been thought of more from, very crypto problem solving, right, from the scalability side, computation side. But now we're trying to think about, how does crypto or blockchain enable things for mass adoption, and how will institutions use it, right? And, some of the key things, you touched upon on the question about like anonymity is, a lot of regulation, like this is not allowed, right? Like you won't banks, none of them can just keep, allow anonymous information. So ZK enables so much that you can keep things private, but verified rather than things that are anonymous. So, enabling compliance, enabling, being able to audit trails, enabling confidential payments. Like these are, gateways to enable these institutional adoption to happen.
Yeah, I mean, just a couple key points as to why this is actually important, right? So, this morning Coinbase came out saying that their call center employees were essentially bribed, and so that's why everyone's getting fake calls on their phone now. Google last week announced that they're going to be using ZK within their wallet for identity, and so I mean, in Buenos Aires, actually, the government has ZK for identity already. They've essentially just verified through an app. No data is actually getting sent anywhere. You verify your date of birth, your driver's license, marriage certificates, taxes, etc. We constantly get asked by governments like, hey, we need to implement an identity standard. we would like to explore how to utilize ZK proofs for that. And so the gate's already open, and so you'll start to see more and more adoption of ZK into the application side, which I think is where most of you guys are talking about. But then there's also ZK on the chain level privacy as well. So you're going to start seeing soon entire blockchains that are fully private, and you might have actual ZK applications within them. But then you'll also have blockchains being able to interact with other blockchains in fully private manner as well. And that'll be coming very soon too.
And so outside of blockchain and crypto, what is your personal favorite ZK-enabled privacy use case for enterprises?
So I would say I have two favorites, if that's okay. One is definitely real-world assets. I think those have a potential tremendous multi-trillion industry to get on-chain. They just need, to the points made here, to have privacy, because people don't want to have all their transactions kind of disclosed to everybody else. They don't want everybody to know what they're holding, who they're sending it to, etc. The other one, which is kind of touches me on a personal level, is medical use case. Today, medical research, pharma research is not able to do so because of the HIPAA and some other regulation of not exposing patient records. And I think if we can use zero knowledge and some privacy technologies on chain to enable selective disclosure and ability to get utility out of medical data, we can advance pharma research and shorten time to market and cost of drugs. And I think that's going to make the world completely different in a few years.
I can throw one
favorite.
I'll throw one fun one actually. The most of the room may not realize, but you're actually already using zero knowledge proofs in your day to day, and it's actually embedded in your browser. So if you've ever gone to a website where you hit like a Cloudflare CAPTCHA wall and you have to like solve the CAPTCHA, in most browsers today, there is this feature that actually, after you solve it, it will embed in your browser a zero knowledge proof so that you can skip that CAPTCHA wall the next time you hit another website that's protected by Cloudflare. And so that's a cool use case, in my opinion, of zero knowledge proofs outside of crypto.
That's great. You literally stole what I was going to say, but I'll take it to another level too. The next thing that is kind of interesting is what is happening on like the ZK TLS side. It's a little broad kind of use case, but what TLS enabled on traditional internet was just encryption on all communication rails. But now ZK TLS enables verifiability, encryption between wallet to node, apps to RPC, that kind of stuff. So it really like creates like a very private experience now, without having to worry about info.
Actually, I was going to say identity because that's a huge unlock, but I like the zk-TLS because that's another area that's been getting built out. A good use case for zk-TLS is, all right, I've got like 5 or 6 different reward programs between like Marriott, Delta, Amex, etc. With zk-TLS, you can have an application that essentially verifies your level in each and creates a composable aggregate reward program that any merchant can then utilize, or any company can then utilize, rather than having to rely on each individual one and go through a clunky process, probably pay tens of millions of dollars to say, hey, you're verified Amex Gold and a Delta flyer. Great. Here's a discount at Chanel or something. I don't know.
Maybe another question for Omar. So focusing this discussion on the enterprise, enterprises typically have legacy systems. And you all touched upon a little bit of like how ZK is implemented into an existing system. So how do you guys tackle that from your perspective?
Good question. We understand that a lot of their IT infrastructure is not going to get ripped out.
Correct.
Right? No one's ever going to sign up for that. It's a good way to like potentially lose your job. So we essentially just integrate the entire blockchain stack into existing IT infrastructure. So we're building out entire authentication mechanisms, authentication systems. We have an entire enterprise suite that is not part of what you see generally on ZK Stack or zksync.io. And so with that, whether it's SSL certificates or token-based certification, we can pretty much integrate the private enterprise blockchain with your existing IT infrastructure, whether it's Azure, AWS, Google Cloud. So the same account sign-ons and the same account authorization you traditionally use is what will also be attached to your on-chain wallets.
How long is that taking you, and how long is that sales cycle?
Well, so the sales cycle started 3 years ago when you first had to answer, like, okay, so what is ZK and why Ethereum? Why don't I just build my own layer one? So we did 2 years worth of that educating. On enterprise, like, look, the enterprise sales cycles on any transformation technology is generally 5 to 7 years. The first 2 years, you're literally just doing education sessions. You are not in any position to be pitching anything. Then you try and find someone that's willing to do a proof of concept. You land the proof of concept. Then the next 3 years, you're essentially spending time on, okay, what is the business value add? How do I drive P&L? We are now at the stage where, okay, how do I help you drive P&L stage? And so the sales cycles now are generally probably going to be 3 to 6 months long, but actual integration deployment, I mean, our tech team can just get it done in like a week.
Patrick,
Well, no.
because you invest in these companies with a 7-year sales cycle, as a seed and pre-seed investor, how are you advising your portfolio to manage that?
Yeah, I mean, because a lot of these technologies are very like forward thinking, massive educational perspective. The problem with like, if you really want enterprise to adopt it, if you want these legacy systems to integrate with it, you can't be selling these technologies. You can't be selling the hype cycle around it. You really have to sell what it enables and what it enables today and how it can improve on it. So you can talk about things on with embedding ZK, it can improve your compliance. It could create like security here. And then when they see the value proposition, then they can understand why they need to integrate it into their systems, rather than, once you sell them on the technology, then they have to worry about like, do I have to, integrate a new system? How much is it going to cost me? Do my developers need to learn a new language? All these kind of questions that just create more and more barriers for adoption to happen. But I also think it's interesting, like how you're doing it on the forefront of this. You're like literally trying, both of you guys are. So it must be like the struggles that you guys are seeing.
I mean, I would add like, I think 10 years ago, like ZK tech was really like from a privacy standpoint, all or nothing. It was just black and white. Either you have it or you don't. I think what's been really powerful over the last decade is it's become very configurable. So now, for different use cases, you can selectively disclose and you can actually make it a choice. I think if you look forward 10 years from now, I think in terms of that pitch and that sales cycle, ZK won't even be the main pitch. It's just an assumption. It's the same way in the early days. Everyone on the web was on HTTP, and when HTTPS came out, that was what unlocks so much value for e-commerce. But we don't go and pitch TLS. We don't go and say, hey guys, like I got SSL. Like this thing is a great way to check out. It's just an assumption about the actual checkout process. And so I think it's going to be something very similar for crypto here.
Yeah, it just becomes a standard essentially.
Exactly.
I would add that beyond the technological element of adopting new technology, we all faced a regulatory kind of landscape that has been challenging. Well, with the new administration, we heard earlier on a panel, stablecoin bill, hopefully coming out soon, market structure bill, hopefully after the election. But the regulators have had a challenge with privacy overall. We look at Monero or Zcash that have tried to do things kind of in this space and have been called out by the regulator over money laundering potential concerns. We are working, the industry is working out ways to deliver privacy for metadata and data in a way that regulators are comfortable with. And I think that will provide foundation for enterprises to actually leap forward and start adopting this.
Sounds hard. Who is setting the standard?
Yeah, the standard setting, those problems I try and stay away from.
Well, no one makes money on standards either. So you don't want to be a company setting the standard, because standards end up becoming commoditized. But it is important for the technology to become standardized. Then things become used.
I think one point to add is that beyond just compliance, I think the thing that we should, as an industry be pushing for is configurable compliance, to the point that ZK used to be a bit all or nothing. Now you can develop policy engines and rules engines where you can actually define thresholds and limits and say when you want it on, when you don't want it on. And those are things that it's really an education process for regulators. And that's where there's already several advocacy groups, for crypto, like Blockchain Association, Coin Center, Crypto ISAC, that are all trying to advocate for this type of technology, certainly in DC.
I'll second that. I mean, when we have a new regulatory kind of definition come out, they usually give us kind of time to kind of adopt it, and we struggle. I mean, all industries struggle kind of to adopt in enterprises. If we can embed reg tech with smart contracts, we could apply and implement new regulation programmatically. Blockchain as an industry could bring a new way of innovating of deployment of regulatory requirements into markets.
But from your experience, you guys' technology, I feel like, are growing at a very rapid pace, changing at a very rapid pace. How are the regulators and policymakers keeping up with you guys in writing fair policy that's business friendly, technology friendly?
It's a dialogue. It's a dialogue because you have to educate them, and it's always kind of a little bit of a race condition, right, between us kind of pushing the envelope on new ideas and new ways, and regulators coming and saying, how can we make this fair and secure and in line with some other dynamics that are happening in the market?
Yeah, I would also add, in addition to that, it's, trying to demonstrate best practices, right? Putting forward, for example, in our case, governance proposals for what best practices on bridges, for example, look like. And then also working with industry advocacy groups to basically demonstrate that this is an example of how that works. But to your point, I think it's really an iterative process. It's a dialogue. It's not like a one size fits all or a one time kind of conversation. It's something that keeps going and iterating as you kind of evolve on that. And more so, it's not just like one jurisdictional conversation. The way US looks at it is different from the way Canada is going to look at it. It's different the way Dubai or Switzerland or Singapore or Hong Kong or every jurisdiction looks at it differently. So
Kind of expand on that a little bit. What are some of the jurisdictions or countries and governments that are easiest to work with? And I guess that's not what I'm asking. Who is the most receptive to what you're trying to pitch?
I think right now there is a lot of experiment. Like I was just in Token 2049 in Dubai. Like I think there's a lot of openness in terms of exploration there. Like I think people have been very much willing to try and see how new technologies emerge there. I also would say like when I was in Hong Kong, I noticed like there's a lot of discussion about stablecoins and looking at how banks can integrate stablecoins right now. And so I think each pocket has their own kind of sentiments and willingness to engage right now, but they're from different angles. Some are more from the kind of pure computation side of it and confidential compute. Others are looking at it on very application specific, for example, like private stablecoins.
I think it really depends on if that regulator and that country sees blockchain as an opportunity to leapfrog on the global stage. That will pretty much determine how aggressive they are on. And some of the questions actually come around to how do you protect against nation state attacks? Right. So that is turning into a more common question that we're starting to see as well.
Yeah. I mean, I would say like, as a venture investor and how we kind of see it, regulations is super important, right? And regulation is also important in terms of like the law. But at the same time, this might be a controversial like advice, but we tell a lot of our portfolio companies, if you feel tech is always so forward thinking, regulators, lawmakers, everything is so far behind. It's going to take forever. So you're not going to have these dialogues and wait for approval and build your technology and then implement it. Like everyone's going to die. Like every company, not every one person. Every company is not going to make it if you wait so long for regulation to happen. So we always tell everyone, it's like, move fast. Like the Facebook model, right? Move fast and break things. And, but it's also like shoot first and ask for permission later, as long as you don't like break the law and do something super sketchy. But if you have innovative technology, a lot of times that is pushing the barrier, pushing boundaries to create innovation to happen.
I would agree. If you're a startup in tech, your job is to figure out where the gray area is, because that is where the innovation actually happens, really, right?
I mean, privacy isn't not sketchy, right? So how, like, I assume everybody here has had some form of conversation with a regulator. What is your experience there? Like, we can talk high level, but like you were in a room with another person talking about this.
I would, emphasize, though, we kind of addressed that in the beginning where privacy isn't sketchy, right? It's being anonymous is sketchy.
Correct.
And those are two different things now.
What is sketchy is the spam calls I keep getting from Quince.
It's true. That is sketchy.
very sketchy.
So we talked about protecting data and kind of zero knowledge and computational privacy. I think the biggest challenge and conversation we had kind of with regulators is about how do we protect metadata? Because the challenge that we've faced as an industry is if we want to protect metadata, we need to use a shielded token. I assume Howard is pretty much doing the same thing. The problem with a shielded token, like let's say Monero or Zcash, is that I can take $100 and give it to you, and we've just established money laundering, and the regulators don't really take a fancy to that. So the conversation has been, how do we overcome this, or how do we find a way to kind of meet the regulatory conversation and requirements? And the one way we kind of realized we could do this is actually by having a token that is unshielded that regulators like, and have that generate a resource that is shielded that kind of operates the chain. But then we're able, because we can separate assets, we are able to put regulatory restrictions like no transfer or other things that regulators like on the shielded kind of resource. That's one way that we've done that regulators said, like, okay, we can see how you protect the privacy of PII or other things, but you're still meeting what we're looking for.
I would break it also down in addition into two kind of ways to bucket the conversation. So first is looking at shielded tokens are able to be managed no differently from unshielded or transparent tokens, in the sense that for a lot of regulators, in my experience, they care about the on-ramps and the off-ramps. So they care about exchanges, they care about bridges, they care about any entry point and exit point, right? And so as long as you're able to do some form of KYC or check at that point, it gives them a strong level of assurance. I'd say the other way to look at it is looking more forward. Now you have, especially with ZK, this kind of configurable option. So you have ZK smart contracts. Now you can actually bake in new compliance tools that didn't exist in a Zcash or a Monero. For instance, I alluded to the policy and rules engines. Those things don't exist on these previous kind of Gen 1 privacy blockchains. In addition, there's been a lot of conversations around verifiable credentials. And what I mean by that is being able to attest that, for example, I'm over the age of 18 without revealing my date of birth, attesting that I'm not from an OFAC sanctioned country without revealing my citizenship, revealing that I am a accredited investor without demonstrating or stating my net worth. So that's another one. And I'd say a third area is really looking at time locks and escrows, especially for the bridge mechanic there. As you move in or move out, you want to escrow those assets, give it a short time lock, and actually give analytics a chance to assess whether this is something that is okay to go through or not. And again, Gen 1 kind of privacy blockchains don't have that capability baked into them. And so I think this is where, looking forward, it's saying we have a lot more in our tool belt now than we did 10 years ago.
Well said, actually.
And I would say, like, regulators, for them though, is they're more concerned about like CYA, right? Like cover your ass kind of situation. So they only really care about like the worst case scenarios when things go wrong, stuff like that. So one of the big analogies I always try to use is, if you think about like autonomous driving, where, the previous iterations of it, they were always like deep learning. It's all unaudible. Like when things go wrong, you don't know what decision did it make to make a wrong decision. It killed someone because who knows what. But, with decision trees, then you can actually know what happens. So that's kind of what is similar with, with these anonymous cryptocurrencies, where you're just completely private. They have no idea. They don't know where the money's coming from. They don't know what any information is, and then they think about money laundering. Where's it going? Where's it coming from? Who's it funding? Stuff like that. So that's what regulators really care about. And of course, they just want to have capital control, especially a lot of these countries. They want to control like outflows and inflows of capital, mostly outflows.
We don't try to spend too much time talking to regulators as a startup. Like, that's inefficient use of time. But it's generally around security of the system. Like, what happens if a proof is like you have a block that's unprovable, or what happens if there's a revert in another chain, etc. It's mostly just around how secure is the system, what are the different threat vectors, etc. And then a lot of it is just at the end of the day, they're looking for education as well, right? They want to be educated. They want to know what is happening in the industry. What is zk? What are the cool applications of zk? Because it could actually be solving a lot of the interesting problem statements that they've got in their heads. Like, hey, I didn't realize that zk could be used for identity in this way. This is great. Like, I can, push for this type of use case.
So kind of last comments from everybody. Outside of your own organization, your own projects, who's building cool use cases using this technology?
I think these two guys are building some pretty cool stuff. I'd say, I guess there's no. You guys go first.
I mean, I'll say I'm not sure there's any one specific company that's formed around this idea, but there's been a ton of discussion around ZK email, and I think that is a really cool use case specifically where I think it's actually going to improve account recovery significantly. So just to give people the idea, it's basically saying like I can use my email and use my pub key authentication there to prove provenance of my ownership of a smart contract wallet, and by doing that, I don't have to deal with this like kind of this gibberish private key anymore or like some crazy mnemonic thing. This is a way for me to demonstrate that this is my account and own it and use it. And that's something that like my mother can get. And so that's why I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, we've seen some crazy ideas from drones coordinating kind of mission parameters securely to nuclear reactor stuff. But I think kind of for everyday use, it's the people that are building kind of the next gen of voting systems that would give us some better governance.
I think the unsexy stuff is the super interesting thing. I'll double down on this again as zk-TLS. I just think that it being so important in the whole transport layer is going to be game changer for all of crypto, all of Web3 for mass adoption use cases. But then the next level of it, and we didn't really talk about this, is zk-FHE, where it's a little forward thinking, but that's going to really create the whole enablement of this confidential payments that we talk about, because confidential payments is the gateway for a lot of these institutions to finally adopt crypto rails. And then secondly is for AI use cases. We didn't talk about AI much here, but a lot of like the data encryption, encrypting at rest, but being able to verify, all of that's going to be incredibly important when we talk about, this autonomous AI agent world type of situation.
World is a pretty interesting application of this. And then ZK P2P. So essentially that is essentially zk-TLS use case, onboard, on-ramp with like Venmo, right?
Moderator.
Let's go.
There you have it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.